He didn't explode. He dissolved. And if you weren't watching carefully, you wouldn't have seen it happen at all. Because the truth is that most tragedies, they don't start with a bang. They start rather with this quiet resignation of a man who's been hurting for far too long and has eventually just run out of places to put that pain. This episode is about the kind of suffering that hides in plain sight. It's the it's the slow collapse of a man who's still showing up. He's still smiling, right? He's still holding the door open. He's still replying, "I'm good," until one day he isn't. We live in this world that doesn't notice when men drown because they were never taught how to ask for help, because the signals that they do send are often misread or ignored. It's because we've mistaken emotional silence for strength and the absence of language for the absence of pain. But what if we've been looking at all of this wrong? What if the real crisis isn't that men are angry or dangerous or apathetic? What if it's that they've just become emotionally invisible until it's too late? So let's step into this story a little slower, shall we? Imagine a man. I'm going to call him Tyler. He's 27. He works retail. He comes home. He eats alone. He scrolls a bit, sleeps. He hasn't had a meaningful conversation in weeks, and he doesn't have any close friends. Well, not really. His texts are mostly group chats that died out months ago, and his family checks in sometimes, but the calls feel formal and shallow and obligatory. Now he's not a monster. He's not evil. He's not dangerous. He's just aching. But he doesn't say anything because every time he's tried, he felt misunderstood or judged or dismissed. And so he adapts and he makes jokes and he shrugs things off. He tells himself it's not worth making a fuss over, and he gets really good at minimizing his needs. And then the pain doesn't go away. It just instead goes underground. Now this is where it usually begins. It's not with violence. It's not with misogyny. It's not with the forms or rage or ideologies. But it starts with this quiet and growing sense that no one truly sees him. That even if he screamed, no one would hear it. So you see, most men, I don't think they want to be feared. They want to be felt. And when they can't be felt, when they believe that they're emotionally irrelevant to the people around them, it's then that they start to disappear into themselves. First, they disappear emotionally, and then relationally, and then sometimes and tragically, fatally. And the people around them, they're often left wondering, what happened, right? They say things like, but he seemed like he was fine, or he was always quiet, right? Or he never said anything was wrong. But you see, silence is not safety, and quiet isn't peace. And if the only reason someone seems fine is because they've stopped trying to be known, then we are not safe at all, I think. So this episode isn't here to dramatize the tragedy. It's here to try and understand it, to slow down and pay attention to the buildup, to the moments before the breakdown, and to the warning signs that aren't neon and flashing, but they're muted and they're steady. This is the emotional erosion that's killing men, and it doesn't happen all at once. See, this fictional story of Tyler, even though it's fictional, is built on thousands of real ones. Men who've said, "I'm fine," and were believed too easily, men who longed to be touched, not just physically, but emotionally as well, and didn't know how to admit it. Men who slowly were losing faith that anyone would ever want to know what they carried on the inside. That kind of loneliness isn't just sad, it's actually kind of dangerous because it's not passive, it's active. It changes people. It corrodes the trust and the hope and the softness. And what fills that space is often numbness or anger, and sometimes both. And this is where we have to be very careful, because when that pain finds a story that gives it meaning, any meaning, it will cling to it. And that's where ideology often steps in. Whether it's incel forums or black pill fatalism or the MGTOW movement, self-separation, right? What's often happening is not just indoctrination, it's it's relief. Finally, someone gave their pain a name. Finally, someone said, "You're not crazy for feeling unwanted. You're not the only one who's been left out. You're you're right. Something's wrong with the world," right? And that sense of validation, it it can be intoxicating, even if the message is attached to a fatalistic theme that's bitter or warped. Because for someone who's felt invisible, being seen, even by a toxic worldview, that can feel like salvation. But that's not where this starts, right? And that's what this episode is here to remind us. The path to tragedy is rarely marked by loud warning signs. It's usually paved with ignored needs and missed check-ins, and swallowed tears and stories that no one ever asked to hear. And if you've been that person, if you've been holding yourself together in silence, this next section is for you. So just listen in. If you if you've known someone like that and you're afraid you've missed it, I also want you to listen in, because this section applies. Because we can't prevent what we refuse to see. And the truth is, most drowning does not look like thrashing. It looks like stillness. And stillness is so easy to overlook. You know, you know what's ironic about this though? And it's the very qualities that we often admire in men, the stoicism, the independence, the emotional control. These are sometimes the very same emotions that keep them isolated when they're hurting the most. So we've normalized male disconnection to such a degree that we interpret it as personality and not pain. Oh, he's just private, we'll say, right? Or he keeps to himself. Or he doesn't like talking about feelings. But what if he does? What if he craves connection, but somewhere along the line he learned that vulnerability was dangerous? Maybe he learned that as a boy, crying made him a target. And maybe as a teenager, he learned that when he opened up, he got laughed at or ghosted. Maybe he learned it in adulthood too, like when he was admitting that he was struggling, and that made people look away instead of lean in. And so he stopped reaching out, and we stopped noticing. We've built a culture where men often don't get to be soft until they're broken, where they don't get to say that they're overwhelmed until they've already collapsed, and where their only sense of belonging or mattering comes when they have a crisis. And then we call them unstable. We say, "Why didn't he just ask for help?" But then we forget that asking for help requires a belief that someone will actually care, right? And that someone will hold what's shared with care. That someone will stay. See, if a man has never experienced that kind of response, what incentive does he have to even keep trying? Now, this is not a justification. It's just a proposed explanation. Because until we understand how deeply these survival mechanisms are ingrained, we'll keep misreading those signs. We'll keep confusing silence with peace. And we'll keep mistaking disengagement with disinterest and numbness with neutrality. And eventually, we'll keep being shocked when that very man we thought was just fine becomes a headline. See, not every man who feels unseen will turn to violence, but every man who feels unseen will begin to disappear emotionally and psychologically and even sometimes spiritually. And that disconnection, it makes him more vulnerable to harmful ideologies, to narratives that give him a target for his pain, and to communities that validate his wounds while inflaming his resentment. Because here's the thing, when someone is drowning and no one throws them a rope, they'll grab onto anything, even if it's made of barbed wire. And that's how incel communities grow. It's not because these men were born angry, but it's because they were born unseen, because their pain was never met with presence, and because their shame was the default lens. And anything that made them feel like they mattered became magnetic, even if it was toxic. And this is the part that most people really don't understand. You see, when you feel powerless for long enough, you stop aiming for healing and you start aiming for control. You want to make sense of what happened to you, and you want to explain the rejection, the invisibility, the loneliness. And if someone hands you a story, any story, that says it's not your fault and you're right to feel hurt and here's who to blame, well, it's easier to swallow that than to sit in the ambiguity of being unwanted with no clear explanations. It's easier to get angry than to stay brokenhearted. It's easier to hate than to grieve. And it's easier to armor up than to ask for help one more time, especially when asking for help has always led you to silence. So the pain calcifies and it becomes this worldview. It becomes an identity. It becomes armor. And now, this man doesn't just feel invisible anymore. He feels righteous in his rage. He feels justified in his withdrawal. He feels a certainty that the world is really against him and that he's just responding accordingly. This is the quiet buildup that we're talking about and addressing. It's not just emotional, it's philosophical as well. It's not just personal, it's actually quite systemic. Because men don't become unreachable overnight. They become unreachable after years and years of being misunderstood and minimized or ignored. And when the emotional pain has no outlet, when it can't be named or held or processed, it mutates. It doesn't stay as pain, it becomes a belief. And the belief is so powerful. It doesn't ask for any evidence. It just needs to feel true. And so when a man starts believing deep in his bones that love is not for him, that worth is something that he'll never earn, and that connection is a currency that he'll never be able to afford, well, that belief becomes and shapes everything. which affects his posture and his choices and his expectations, his relationships or lack thereof. And that belief, it's not quiet forever. No, it starts loud in his mind, right? And then it spills into anonymous forums, and then it hardens in echo chambers, and sometimes, tragically, it breaks open into the real world. And that's what we see on the news. But what we don't see are the thousands of other men on that same emotional spectrum who haven't harmed anyone, but who are quietly slipping into numbness and disillusionment and despair. And that should really concern us because, and not because they're dangerous, but because they're dying while they're still alive. They're dying emotionally. And relationally, they've been severed. And spiritually, they are untethered. And it doesn't always make the headlines, but it always matters. Because we are losing men, not just to suicide and not just to extremism, but to a kind of quiet erasure that nobody seems to be naming. So let's name this, shall we? Let's call it what it is. It's a failure of connection. Not just their failure to reach out, but our collective failure to also reach in and to check in before they collapse, to notice the sparks that are dimming, to ask one more time even when they brush us off. Because here's the truth. The drowning, it often started long before the surface began to break. And if we want to stop the tragedy from repeating, we have to start listening when the water is still. So let me just take a breath here. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this. I get this. To feel like the pain is too big or too systemic or too deeply rooted for us to change it. But that helplessness, it's part of the same story that we're trying to rewrite here. Because this isn't about saving everyone. It's instead about seeing someone. And if we all did this, just maybe once a day, just, yeah, one moment, perhaps things would start to shift. You don't have to be a therapist to notice when someone's gone quiet. You don't have to be a crisis responder to say, hey, I just want you to know I miss you. Are you okay? You don't have to solve their pain. You just need to make space for it. That's the beginning of healing. It's not advice. It's not solutions. It's not motivational speeches, but just your presence, your attunement, the kind of attention that says, I see you and you matter. You're allowed to be messy around me. I've got space for you. See, most men have never experienced someone saying that to them. They've been trained instead to be useful, to be competent, to be low maintenance. And when they can't keep that up, they disappear out of shame. Because if all you've ever been valued for is your ability to stay strong, well, what happens when you start to fall apart? I mean, who are you allowed to be in that moment when you haven't been given any other options? This is why emotional safety matters so much. It's just not in therapy and not only in relationships, but in culture as well, and in friendships and in community, in the way we talk about masculinity. We need to unlearn this idea that emotions are dangerous or weak, because emotions are not the problem. It's the unfelt emotions that are the concerning aspect. Unspoken grief does not dissolve. It builds. Unprocessed shame, it doesn't just fade, it festers. And unacknowledged loneliness, it doesn't quietly just sit in the corner. It grows teeth. And when we refuse to feel, we don't become stronger. we become strangers to ourselves. And eventually, the pain that we haven't faced, it now becomes the pain that we start to inflict on others, on our bodies, on our futures. So, what do we do now? Well, first, let's stop glamorizing numbness. Let's stop celebrating the strong, silent type like he isn't one bad day away from a complete collapse. Start instead by honoring emotional honesty, not just in women and not just in art, but in men, in everyday conversations, in the way that we teach boys to speak and communicate. Let's start asking better questions like, instead of asking, are you good? Instead, consider asking, what's weighing on you today? Instead of saying, well, what's new? Ask, what are you not saying that you wish someone would ask or hold? And then learn to stay, not just physically, but emotionally as well. Sit with them in the awkward silence and hear something painful without rushing in to try fixing it. Let someone's truth live in the room without you turning away. That kind of presence is rare, but it's how we begin to pull someone back from the edge, from the brink. And if you're listening to this and thinking, I'm the one who's drowning, then this part is for you. You might think that no one sees it, but you're here. You press play on this video, you're still listening, which means there's still a part of you that wants to be found. And it's a part of you that hasn't given up yet. It's a part of you that still hopes that it's not too late. And I need you to hear me clearly on this. That part of you has got it right. It's not too late. You're not too far gone. You are not beyond connection. Even if you've been rejected, even if you've been overlooked, even if your kindness was mistaken for weakness or your truth was met with silence, there are still people who want to show up and see the real you. And they can't if you stay hidden. They can't if you keep playing a role that you've outgrown that isn't serving you any longer. You don't have to tell your whole story today, maybe, but maybe you can tell someone a small part of your story and then see what happens when you let yourself be known. And if you've been the one who's watching someone else sort of fade, don't wait for the perfect moment to say something. It might never come. Instead, say it now. While the water is rising, while there's still time, speak now. Even if they brush you off, even if they don't know how to receive it, or even if it, especially when it feels awkward. Say something like, I've noticed you seem a little far lately, and I miss the way that we used to talk. And I'm here if you want to share something or say something, and mean it when you say that. Because connection doesn't happen in grand gestures. It happens in the mundane. It happens in that text that says, hey, I just want you to know you're on my mind. I was thinking of you. And in the pause that gives someone space to exhale, in the moment that you ask, not because you have the answer, but because you're willing to stay through uncertainty, you'll open up that space. And we need more of that. We need less performance and more presence. We need less analysis and more attunement. Because most of the time, people aren't looking for rescue. They're looking instead for witnessing, right? They're looking for someone to say, I see it. I see that pain and that weight and that ache. And you're not crazy. You're not alone. And you don't have to carry that in silence anymore. That's the real turning point. Not the day that someone finds a perfect solution, but it's the day when we realize that we're allowed to be seen, that these individuals matter and that their story has space here, that even in the midst of their mess, they are still worthy of connection. And that maybe for the first time, someone noticed. There's something profoundly human about wanting to be seen before you were picked, about being known before you were fixed, right? Or being understood before you were explained. But in a world where performance is rewarded and pain is like privatized, that needs to that need it just gets buried under layers of armor, especially for men. And that's how the drowning begins. It's not about weakness. It's not about fragility, but it's about disconnection. Because when you remove connection, you remove context. And when you remove context, people stop making sense, even to themselves. And you start to wonder instead, why can't I get it together? Or why does it feel like no one notices that I'm fading? Or why am I always on the outside of life that I really desire? And in the absence of real answers, the mind fills the blanks with blame and shame and despair. And this is where the ideology becomes one's identity. And it's not because ideas are true, but it's because these ideas offer structure to a soul that feels formless. And it's seductive. It's even comforting, because feeling hopeless in a group still feels far better than feeling invisible when you're alone. And here's the danger. When someone finally feels seen, even by a harmful community, they'll often defend that space because it met a need that everyone else ignored, perceptually. And that's why calling someone out rarely works. That's why logic rarely reaches someone who's hurting. Because you're not just attacking their beliefs, you're actually threatening their only sense of belonging. So, what's the alternative then? It's not coddling. It's not excusing them, especially the harm, but it's creating a pathway back. It's building something better than what they've found in the first place, something that's more human, something that's more honest, and something that's more whole. It's a space where they're not just tolerated, but they're actually known. They're not just allowed in, but they're invited in. And they're not just understood, but they're actually held. And that's how we stop the quiet buildup to tragedy. It's not with arguments, but with this sense of attunement. It's not with fear tactics, but with a sense of presence. And it's not with judgments, but with an invitation to come out of hiding. Because hiding is what got them there in the first place. Hiding like their real fear, hiding their real needs, hiding their humanity. And no one, not one of us, heals when we're hiding. So let's come back to my fictional Tyler for a moment, shall we? He was the man who represents so many real ones that I was describing earlier. What if someone actually noticed? What if on one of those quiet nights, a friend texted just to say, I've been thinking about you and I miss you. You don't have to do this alone. What if someone asked about more than just his plans that weekend, right? What if someone didn't just talk to him when he was performing well, but when he was clearly off? Would it have fixed everything? Maybe not. But you know what it might have done? It might have changed something. It might have reminded him that connection isn't a currency that he has to earn, but a birthright that he can return to. It might have interrupted the story that said to him, you don't matter unless you are impressive. And it might have offered him a place to land instead of another reason to run. And for so many men, that one moment is enough to change like an entire trajectory. The difference between collapse and comeback is often just one safe relationship. One person who says, you don't scare me and you don't exhaust me. You don't need to be anything other than real with me in this moment. I've got space for you. So listen, if you're hearing this and you're the one who's been hiding, this is me saying that very thing to you. You are not too much. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not invisible here. Now, I may not know your full story of what you've walked through in life, but I know that stories can change and that sometimes the first step out isn't dramatic necessarily. It's just a breath or a whispered truth, a single moment of choosing not to disappear. And you don't have to come back to life all at once, but don't let the silence bury you. There are people who will hold what you've been holding. They may not do it perfectly or with confidence, but they'll do it willingly and with a kind of presence that heals, not because it has answers, but because it makes room for your questions. And if you're the one who does see it happening to someone else, don't wait until it's too late. You don't need the perfect words. You don't need a therapy degree. You just need to notice and to name it and to stay. Because someone once said that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. I think the same is true of despair. You see, the opposite of despair isn't hope, but it's being held in the midst of hope. So this isn't just about men, it's about all of us, I think. But it is especially about men. Men who've been taught that their value is tied to how little they need or how much they can provide and how well they perform and how quietly they suffer. But let's rewrite that story, shall we? And let's interrupt this buildup because no one should have to become a tragedy just to be taken seriously. No one should have to collapse to be worthy of care. No one should have to drown to finally be seen. Y'all got this.